theories. Have you ever wondered how a new species actually comes to be? I mean, forget about the millions of years for a second. What are the actual nuts and bolts? What's that precise moment when one species splits and becomes two? Forever? That's the huge, fascinating question we're going to dive into.
So, to get us started, let's think about a simple question. We all know a polar bear when we see one, right? And we definitely know a grizzly. They live in different places, they look totally different, they act different. I mean, they're obviously separate species, aren't they?
Well, this is where things start to get a little weird. You see, in some areas where their territories are beginning to overlap, often because of climate change, they can and actually do interbreed, and they produce fertile hybrid offspring. This one fact just completely messes with our simple, tidy definition of what a species is supposed to be.
And that brings us right to our first major point. Figuring out what a species even is way more complicated than you'd think. It turns out, nature doesn't always like to fit into the neat little boxes we try to build for it.
Now, this is the definition most of us probably learned back in biology class, the biological species concept. It feels really intuitive, right? If two things can make babies, and those babies can also make babies, they're the same species. If they can't, they're different. Simple enough. But that simple idea falls apart really, really fast. I mean, what about fossils? You can't exactly get two T-Rex skeletons to mate. What about bacteria that just split in two and don't even have sex? And then you have some species that look absolutely identical, like these meadowlarks, but they never interbreed because their songs are so different. It's like they're speaking completely different languages.
So to get around all these problems, scientists have a whole toolkit of definitions. For fossils, they might use the morphological concept, which is basically just based on how it looks, its physical shape. Or they could use the ecological concept, which is about an organism's role in its environment. And of course, now we have the phylogenetic concept, which uses DNA to trace shared ancestry. The point is, each of these has its own strengths and weaknesses. There is no single perfect answer. Okay, so here's the crucial thing. For one species to split and become two, you have to stop them from mixing their genes. You can think of this whole process as building reproductive walls between different populations.
And these walls come in two main flavors. You've got your prezygotic barriers, which act before fertilization can even happen. This could be something like living in different places, mating at different times of the year, or having those different mating rituals, like the meadowlark songs. And then you have post-zygotic barriers. These kick in after fertilization. This is where a hybrid offspring might not survive, or if it does, it ends up sterile. Think of a mule, which comes from a horse and a donkey, but can't have its own babies.
Okay, so now we know what keeps species separate. The next logical question is, how do these walls get built in the first place? Well, it generally happens in one of two major ways. When populations are physically pulled apart, or, believe it or not, even when they're living side by side.
The most common way is what's called allopatric speciation. This is the classic scenario. A population gets split by some kind of physical barrier. Maybe a mountain range rises up, or a river carves a new path. Once they're separated, the two groups just start evolving on their own independent paths.
And a perfect and really cool example of this, the shrimp of Panama. Millions of years ago, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were connected. But then, about 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama rose up out of the sea, splitting that one ocean in two and splitting populations of these alpha shrimp. The groups on each side evolved separately. And today, if you take a shrimp from the Pacific and put it in a tank with one from the Atlantic, they don't mate, they fight. Geography literally built a wall of behavior between them.
Now, for the version that's a bit more of a head-scratcher, sympatric speciation. This is when new species pop up even when the populations are living in the exact same area. There's no physical barrier at all. So, how on earth does that happen?
Well, here's a case of evolution happening right under our noses. The apple maggot fly originally laid its eggs only on hawthorn berries, but then settlers brought apples to North America. A small group of these flies made a little habitat shift and started laying eggs on this new fruit. Now here's the key. Apples mature faster than hawthorns. This created a temporal wall, a time-based barrier, selecting for flies that developed faster. Now the apple flies and the hawthorn flies barely interact. A new species is being born, not separated by space, but by timing.
And get this, you don't always need a mountain range or a new continent. Sometimes all it takes is one single gene. In these mimulus flowers, scientists discovered that changing just one gene that controlled flower color was enough to switch its main pollinator from bees to hummingbirds. And just like that, with one tiny genetic tweak, you've built a powerful reproductive wall. So, populations diverge, new species start to form. But what happens if that mountain erodes? Or their habitats expand and they actually meet again? What happens when these two worlds collide? This meeting place is called a hybrid zone, and it's like a fantastic natural laboratory for studying evolution in action. A great example is the Bombina toads in Europe. There are two distinct species, one with a yellow belly and one with a red belly. Where their ranges meet, they sometimes interbreed. So what happens next?
Well, these zones really have three possible fates. The first is reinforcement. This happens if the hybrid offspring are weaker or less fit. Natural selection will then favor anything that prevents interbreeding, basically making those walls stronger and pushing the two species apart for good. The second is fusion. If the hybrids are perfectly healthy and successful, the walls can crumble, gene flow increases, and the two species can actually merge back into a single one. And the third is stability, a kind of fragile truce, where the two species stay separate, but they just keep producing hybrids right there in the middle zone.
All right, let's zoom all the way out now and look at the big picture. When we think about evolution over millions of years, does it happen slowly and steadily, or does it happen in big, dramatic jumps?
Well, there are two main ideas about this. On one hand, you've got the gradual model, which is the idea of slow, steady, continuous change over vast stretches of time. But then there's the punctuated model. This suggests that life goes through long periods of stability, not much change at all, that are then punctuated by these brief, rapid bursts of change. And this model actually helps explain why the fossil record can sometimes look so incomplete or gappy. Those moments of rapid evolution just happen too fast to leave behind many fossils.
And sometimes this rapid change is truly spectacular. It's a process called adaptive radiation. You have to imagine one ancestral species stumbling upon a whole new world of opportunities, a bunch of empty ecological roles just waiting to be filled. When that happens, you get an evolutionary explosion, as that one species rapidly diversifies into a whole host of new ones to fill every available job.
So just how explosive are we talking? Well, let's consider the sunfish of North America. After a climate shift about 15 million years ago, a bunch of new aquatic environments opened up. One ancestral species found itself with almost endless opportunity. And the result? An adaptive radiation that produced this many distinct species. 15. All from a single common ancestor, each one now a specialist in its own little corner of the ecosystem. That is what an evolutionary explosion looks like.
So let's boil it all down. What are the big ideas to take away from all this? First, the whole idea of a species is a really useful concept, but it's also a bit messy and imperfect. Second, the absolute engine of speciation is reproductive isolation, the building of those walls. Third, this process can happen whether populations are separated by a mountain range or just by their own behavior in the same place. And finally, the pace of evolution isn't set in stone. It can crawl along or it can happen in a full-on sprint.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. We've seen how huge environmental changes, like the rise of an isthmus or the introduction of a new fruit, can kickstart speciation. So in our world today, which is changing faster than ever, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where is evolution quietly, or maybe not so quietly, already at work building the next new species?